Welcome, everyone. My name is Dalton Hesley. I am Program Manager of Rescue Reef here at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School, and I'm very excited to have you all with us tonight. This is actually the first Rescue Reef webinar Zoom we've ever hosted. So one, we're really excited, but also unsure of how it's going to go, so bear with us. We put together a really cool lineup tonight. Dr. Diego Lirman, our lab director, will be starting the conversations and discussion, giving you a brief overview on coral reefs, the issues they're facing, and then our reef restoration research here at the University of Miami. I will then step in to talk a little bit about our Rescue Reef program, as well as our integration of citizen science and how all of you can get involved. And then Juliana Grillo, our undergraduate Canon Coral Fellow, will finish things off, discuss how we work on science communication and collaboration with different groups to really amplify our impact. After those talks, we will open it up for question and answer. And so at the bottom of your screens, you will probably notice that there is a Q&A box. So at any time during this talk, you're able to actually type in your questions and direct them to certain people. Then at the end, we'll make sure to loop back and touch on those so that you have an opportunity to learn more about our program, how you can get involved, or any other coral reef related topics. I imagine there's probably still a few people trickling in. So while we wait for additional people to tune in, we have a few icebreakers, some polls for you all. I believe we have 5 short questions just to see who our audience is, what they know about coral reefs. So at this time, you should see one right in front of you. So if you'd like, take a moment and let us know where you're tuning in from. All right, a lot of people in the Southeast. I imagine that that's Florida, so welcome, but a few people from other parts of the States as well as international. Okay, so we will move on to question number 2. So now we're interested in hearing what your impression is of the status of Florida reef corals. All right, a little diversity there. You can see how we have some differences of opinions. All right, we'll move on to question number 3. So overall, how knowledgeable would you say you are on coral reefs? That'll give us an idea of how in-depth we should go tonight. A lot of differences. That's awesome. That means that we're going to be talking to some experts, but also some new coral reef enthusiasts. All right, we'll move on to specifically coral reef restoration for our next question. Oh, excuse me, the threats to coral reefs, knowledge level on the threats to coral reefs. Again, it's looking like there is some diversity in the responses, which is awesome. Again, means that we'll be talking to an interesting audience. And then our final question before we kick things off. So this one is specifically asking about your knowledge level on the tools available for coral conservation, things you can do to help conserve coral reefs. Awesome. Again, a wide diversity, which is wonderful. We love having people who are passionate about corals tune in and engage our group, but we also love having people who are not very knowledgeable work with us, because that's really the point of our research lab and program. So again, we thank you all for coming. It looks like we have had a few new individuals join since we started our poll, so welcome. As I mentioned, my name is Dalton. I am Program Manager of Rescue Reef and will be moderating tonight's webinar. We also have Dr. Diego Lirman, who began this lab and program and will be our first presenter, as well as Juliana Grillo, who is our undergraduate Canon Coral Fellow, who will be talking about some of our science communication efforts. So with that, I again thank you all for coming and hope you enjoy the presentations. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Lirman.
All right, thank you, Dalton, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us, wherever you're joining us from. I'm going to take a few minutes to set up here to share some of my slides with you. Just bear with me. All right, I think we're up and running. All right, so again, my name is Diego Lirman. I run the benthic ecology and reef restoration lab at the University of Miami. You do see my name over there and you see my face on the screen, but I'm actually taking credit for the amazing work that my lab has done over the past over 12 years, focusing on the recovery and restoration of corals and coral reefs in South Florida and elsewhere. So how do we get here? Why do we even care? Why are we discussing coral reef restoration? I'm pretty sure that regardless of your background, you've seen a graph similar to this. No, this is not the stock market after March 15 of this year. This, unfortunately, is the very rapid decline in coral cover that reefs have experienced, not only in Florida, but around the world. Regardless of where you are, there's some commonalities, there's some common triggers and stressors that have influenced and driven this decline, whether it be overfishing, physical impacts of hurricanes, ship groundings, diseases, algal overgrowth, sedimentation issues, pollution issues, and then climate change related factors like ocean acidification, high temperature and low temperature, bleaching. The triggers vary based on where you are, and the sequence of these triggers also vary based on where you are. So if you're in Florida, you may think that the key driver of the decline may be bleaching, whereas if you are somewhere else, there may be another factor that you believe the driver is the key driver for coral reef decline. Nevertheless, there's some common factors that seem to be triggers or drivers of decline around the world. A recent paper came out that highlighted how your perception of the status of an ecosystem, in this case coral reefs, can be influenced by your window into this world, by the first time you saw these resources. And that is important because in many cases, your expectations drive the outcome of restoration. So what I wanted to do, because we do have probably a very wide audience in terms of ages and backgrounds, I wanted to ask you, again, we're going to put you to work here. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. So Valeska, if you can bring this first question up. I want to find out, based on your impression or your knowledge, what do you think the proportion, the portion, the percentage of the reef bottom was in terms of the coral cover, the amount of the bottom that was occupied by stony corals 50 years ago. So what was coral cover based on your experience or your knowledge 50 years ago in Florida? And the options are less than 10%, between 10 and 25, 25 to 50%, and more than 50% of the bottom occupied by stony corals in Florida 50 years ago. So let's see the answers. All right, so 43% of you thought the answer lies somewhere between 25 and 50%, which shows me that you guys have a lot of experience or knowledge. Because if we can move on, Valeska. The actual answer is 44% based on this paper that surveyed over 50 researchers. Okay, so that's pretty close to what people believe or know about coral reefs. So the next question is, where do you think we are today? The same metric, the proportion of the bottom of the reef benthos or bottom that's occupied by stony corals. What do you think that cover is today? Less than 5%, between 5 and 10%, 10 to 25%, and over 25% of the bottom occupied by corals in Florida today. All right, let's see the answers. Between 5 and 10% was the winner. Over 50% of the people believe that to be the true answer. We can just move on. Based on a number of recent surveys done in Florida, the actual answer is somewhere below 5%. So the conditions are clearly declining over time. So we've gone from over 44% to less than 5% of the bottom occupied by corals in less than 50 years. So this is the reason why we are now left with very few options in terms of coral recovery. One of those being active coral restoration. So what happens when you lose coral cover? Well, coral cover and structure on reefs go hand in hand. So when you lose cover, you lose structure. And many of the ecosystem services that are provided by coral reefs are dependent on the 3D topographic complexity of coral reefs. So reef structure and function go hand in hand. You lose cover, you lose structure, you lose reef function. And why is that important? Because we now know, especially based on research that's been done over the past 10 years, that healthy reefs can mitigate more than 90% of the incoming wave energy. So if reefs that are close to shore in shallow water can take away more than 90% of the energy of the incoming waves. That is a tremendous amount of coastal protection that healthy coral reefs provide. When you lose that structure, you lose that protection. So that first line of natural defenses are pretty much gone. Places like Florida that have the most valuable and vulnerable shorelines are especially susceptible to climatic extremes, storm surge, waves, and thus when you lose the protection provided by reefs, you lose the economic services that these protective barriers provide. So just to give you an example, the total protection provided by coral reefs in South Florida is over $600 million on a yearly basis. But whenever you have a major storm, like we had Hurricane Irma in 2017, and we have another coming in a few days, that value raises or rises exponentially to over 7 billion. So coral reefs are extremely valuable to the local economy. The good thing about where we are in time is that we are in what I would like to call the golden age of ecosystem restoration, especially when we're talking about marine ecosystems. There's been an explosion in the number of projects, the tools available, the footprint, and the efficacy of these efforts. And not only dealing with coral reefs, but also we're talking about the expanded efforts going on to recover mangrove fringe forests as well as seagrass habitats. So we are now in the position to be able to mitigate and maybe recover some of these declines through active restoration of these very crucial coastal ecosystems. Just focusing on corals and in the Caribbean and even further on one coral taxon, the branching Acropora taxon that includes two species, Acropora cervicornis, the staghorn corals, and Acropora palmata, the elkhorn corals. Just focusing on these two species, over the past 15 years, there's been an explosion in the number of programs focused solely on growing and planting corals from these two threatened and endangered species. So over 85 programs only in the Caribbean focused on coral reef restoration have cropped up over the past 15 years. And just as an aside, the work that I've been doing in the University of Miami started in 2007. So our work, the work that I've been presenting today and the work that Dalton will be presenting later on is only 13, 14 years old. So we're talking about just over a decade and things have changed significantly over these past 12 to 14 years. Just focusing on the work that we do in Miami-Dade. So our work focuses exclusively within Florida in Miami-Dade, going from the Sunny Isles area all the way to the southern boundary of Biscayne National Park. We have two in-water nurseries where we now grow 7 coral species with a big emphasis on the staghorn and elkhorn corals. We have restored over 25 sites within Miami-Dade County. We have planted over 20,000 corals over the past few years, and we grow and outplant hundreds of genotypes onto these degraded reefs. So we've expanded to the point where we are now having an ecological impact and producing an ecological benefit on the restored reefs. The methods that we use focus on the asexual propagation of corals, coral gardening, that entails an initial collection of corals from the wild. Hopefully we're done with collections at this point. Our first collections were done about 14 years ago, and since then we've gone out maybe 2 or 3 times, especially after storms, to replenish our stock. But we have conducted all of the work that I've described with very limited wild collections. because we're dealing with threatened species and we don't want to have a negative impact on remaining stock. So we go out and collect small pieces of corals. We bring them into our nurseries where we grow them. We fragment or prune them sequentially to increase our biomass and our productivity. And then when we have a sustainable stock, then we take these nursery grown corals and we plant them onto depleted reefs. And then we watch them grow. And hopefully in time, as they get to sexual maturity, we watch them reproduce, release their gametes. In fact, next week we're going out to hopefully see, document, and collect the spawn of these nursery grown corals, because we have our mass spawning event scheduled, or at least predicted to be starting next week. So we've had a tremendous amount of success growing and planting these corals onto the reefs of Miami-Dade County and elsewhere. This is just a graph showing you the different regions of the Florida Reef Tract, as well as Puerto Rico, all the way to the right. And these are 1-year survivorship numbers. So of the thousands and thousands of corals that we've outplanted over the past 10 years, we get more than 85% survivorship within the first year. So we're making, again, a very significant ecological impact by growing and planting these corals. We've been very successful at growing and planting these corals over the past 10 years. We've also seen explosive growth, and this is one of the reasons why we're focusing on Acropora, both palmata and cervicornis, because these are branching corals that grow very fast. So we can have a very significant amount of growth over 1 or 2 years. So if we start with a fingerling about the size of your finger on your left, about 5 centimeters in height, and then after 2 years, you see these amazing complex structures being developed. So at this stage, these corals are serving the function they're supposed to be serving. They're habitat for fish, they mitigate wave impact, so they're functioning as recovered, restored ecosystems after only a couple of years. And these are just landscape pictures of restored reefs in Florida on the left, and then in the Dominican Republic and Belize on your right. We can have major landscape level impacts through our restoration. So this approach of coral gardening, of growing corals within nurseries and planting them, does work and has worked throughout the Caribbean and is now expanded into the rest of the world. But challenges still remain. The one thing to realize and know is that, yeah, we can grow corals very efficiently within our nurseries, but once we plant these corals onto natural reefs, they become part of the natural seascape, and they are influenced by the same stressors that affect wild colonies. So if there's a bleaching event that comes through, or there's a hurricane that comes through, both wild and restored corals are going to be affected the same way. So we've seen major mortality because of these natural events, especially within the 2014-2015 bleaching, back-to-back bleaching years. We lost more than 50% of our outplanted corals in some locations due to the high temperatures. Okay, so that shows you that our work is not done. There's still challenges that these corals faced. Many of the stressors that killed these corals in the first place over the past 50 years are still there. We still have sedimentation, high nutrient impacts. We still have all of these factors compounded by global climate change. So we need to do something beyond just growing corals. Otherwise, we'd be planting, as my good friend Andrew Baker says, the next cohort of climate victims. We don't want to do that. We don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time and effort growing corals that are going to die in the next bleaching event. So, what's the answer to this issue? It's through science. We are learning a tremendous amount by doing this work. And this graph, this table in the middle shows you that, yes, there's been a tremendous amount of mortality, but at the same time, some of these genotypes in some environments survive the very extreme bleaching conditions. So there seems to be some genotypes that do very, very well under high temperature conditions. So we can then focus on these corals, not only by propagating them and putting them into susceptible habitats, but looking at their physiology, their symbiosis, to learn what makes corals susceptible, as well as corals very resilient or resistant. So we're learning through restoration how to grow a better coral. So what's next? And I'm glad you asked, because we've done a tremendous amount of work. The question is, how do we move forward? Do we just plant more corals and hope for the best? The answer is no. So this is where we are today. You know, we just got funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA to set up the Southeast Florida Coral Reef Restoration Hub. What this does is brings together some of the best minds in ecosystem restoration and coral reef restoration to the table to work together, because we are all very good at what we do individually. The question is, can we combine our efforts, our methods, and our approaches to come up with a long-lasting way to recover these reefs? So we call it from colonies to coastlines. And these are the folks that are involved. We have faculty members from the University of Miami, the Rosenstiel School, College of Engineering, our good friends from NOVA, Seeker International, led by Margaret Miller, working on sexual reproduction, our friends from Frost Science, working with us on education and outreach, as well as the Florida Aquarium, working on rearing corals from larvae. So these are the four pillars of our approach, of our newly created Reef Restoration Hub. We have restoration, which is what we've been doing for the past 10, 12 years. We have work on adaptation. I mentioned the work that Andrew Baker does in his lab, trying to stress harden corals, make sure that corals that we plant are better able to survive climatic extremes. We are working now at a different scale. We're going from colonies to coastlines. We know that these corals and these reefs are very, very important in terms of protecting the shoreline. So we want to design restoration activities that not only bring back the corals and the fish and the other associated services, but also protect our shorelines. And finally, the work that Dalton has been doing for the past few years, enhancing our education footprint and reach. So this is, in a summary, the work that the Restoration Hub is going to do over the next 3 years. We're going to plant over 150,000 corals, including both sexual and asexual propagation. We're going to restore over 20 reefs between Miami-Dade and Broward counties. We're going to enhance the spatial connectivity of these populations so that corals can recover by themselves. We are going to increase the genetic diversity within our coral populations. We're going to mitigate the impacts of the seas. This is a major disturbance that's come into the forefront starting in 2014. We're going to try to bring in some of the lost grazers back into the system to see if we can enhance coral survivorship through enhanced grazing. And the idea is also to increase the recreational opportunities for locals and visitors. So in terms of climate adaptation, what is it that we're doing? We're taking the recommendations of the recent National Academy of Sciences report. Andrew Baker was a part of that, and he's the co-PI of this effort. And we're trying to come up with ways to boost the resilience of restored coral populations. One of the cool aspects of what we're doing is we're moving corals from warm habitats into cool environments to see if we can gain some extra time before these cool environments become warmer. We're basically moving warm genes into cool environments, into cool genetic pools to see if we can boost their thermal tolerance over time. We're stress hardening these corals so that when we plant them out in different environments, they do better when they're stressed by temperature and other factors. And we're also trying to seed corals with heat-tolerant algal symbionts. This is cutting-edge science that Andrew Baker is leading to try to prime these corals in front of the next bleaching event to enhance their resilience. In terms of the coastal resilience aspect, we're using a unique resource that we have at the University of Miami, which is the largest wave and wind simulator in the world. This is the Sustain tank, where we can deploy these coral structures, these coral models, and then run waves through them and find out what arrangement of corals, what density, what morphologies of corals are better at mitigating the impacts of waves and reducing wave energy. So we're spending a lot of time within the simulators trying to come up with the ideal restored reef in terms of not only coral populations, but also coastal resilience. And finally, the work that Dalton is going to describe to increase our footprint, our reach, and efficiency by bringing in the public to help us restore these reefs. So before we get into that, I want to show you a cool video that we shot within Sustain. This is the facility, and you can see in the background, you see one of these coral models. We built breakwater, and we glued on top of the breakwater staghorn skeletons, so skeletons of dead staghorn corals. And you can see that there's a big difference whenever you have a reef in the far part of the image. You see waves breaking. In the front, where you don't have a reef, then the waves just go straight through, and that's energy that's not lost. That's energy that's going to be released when these waves reach the shoreline. So it's very important to have healthy. This is a very clear image where you see a wave breaking, where you have a reef with corals on top, compared to a reef, well, no bottom topography whatsoever, where the wave doesn't feel the bottom and just goes straight through. So this is the type of work that we're now doing to protect our shorelines using coral reef restoration. So finally, so what can you do locally to protect and restore our coastal ecosystems? And again, you can't just think about coral reefs. Coral reefs are just one of the ecosystems that we need to be concerned about. We also have seagrass beds, and we also have shoreline mangroves. You can get involved in the many local NGOs that are working tirelessly to make a difference, to make sure that we have the best science and the best management in place. A good example is Miami Waterkeeper, that's run by Rachel Silverstein, who's a UM graduate. She was actually instrumental in getting some of the funding that we use to restore some of the local reefs through her actions against the impacts caused by the Port of Miami dredge. You can support Everglades restoration. I mean, sometimes hard to understand why supporting Everglades restoration benefits the reefs, but the water connects all of these systems. We have a highly connected watershed coming from the Everglades all the way into our coastal reefs. So we need more and cleaner fresh water getting into the coastal bays to be able to restore again the mangroves and the seagrasses that are well connected to our coral reefs. You can support our coral reef restoration efforts, and Dalton will describe what those are. So you can get involved, whether you are a diver, a snorkeler, or just somebody interested in helping support reef restoration. You can support the establishment of marine protected areas. This is crucial here in South Florida. You'll be surprised to know that the ecosystems of Miami-Dade County outside Biscayne National Park, extending all the way to Palm Beach County, are not protected beyond fisheries management rules. So you can pretty much do, a lot of damage in these ecosystems because there's no level of protection. Once you get to the Keys, you have a national park, you have a sanctuary, and you have state parks. Up here in Miami-Dade, Broward, and North, we don't have any formal marine protected areas. So we really need to work to enhance the protection that these ecosystems need to be able to recover and thrive. You can be a responsible boater and fisher. This is very timely because we have lobster mini season going on, and you see people going out there doing crazy things. So you can do your part by learning the way to be a safe boater and fisher. And finally, limit pollution. Even simple strategies. Just recently, there's been a fertilizer ordinance passed limiting the input of fertilizer and nutrients into the nearshore watershed. Those small actions can basically do a lot to protect our nearshore resources. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to pass it over to Dalton, and I'll stick around if you guys have any questions about the ecology and the science behind reef restoration, or any questions about our future activities. I'll be happy to address those. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lirman. I will now switch to my presentation. But before I begin, we do have a question to figure out how familiar you are with Rescue Reef. So who in our audience has already participated in a Rescue Reef expedition? So come offshore with us to outplant corals. All right, that's really exciting. I would have thought it would have been more people, but a large part of this audience has actually not been offshore with us. So I'm very excited that I'll be able to talk a little bit about our Rescue Reef Citizen Science program and what citizen science is, because it's a really exciting way for you to learn about these issues, these research techniques, while actually participating firsthand. So with that, let's get into it. The portion of my talk is Coral Restoration and Citizen Science for Social Change. We accomplish this by building a program around our research. So as kind of a recap of what Dr. Lirman touched on, coral reefs are not doing very well. You know, in some areas here in South Florida, we're seeing coral cover below 5%, right? So a lot of the reefs that we see look a lot like the image you see on the right. But thankfully, restoration has scaled up to the point that we can actually see success. But it's important we look at how we're measuring success. Dr. Lirman mentioned that we've had exceptional advancements in the field to the point that we're restoring reefs at the ecosystem level. But again, it's really important that we consider the conditions that these reefs still exist in. You know, are these resilient coral populations? What are we doing to address the ongoing stressors that they face that cause decline in the first place? And so this talk will touch on that briefly. Some of the pitfalls of restoration are that they're costly. You know, to actually maintain a coral restoration program can be quite expensive, and it requires a lot of labor and training. To outplant corals, you have to be underwater, manually labor, hammering nails, building structures, planting corals, maintaining monitoring. So it requires a lot of individuals. Most importantly, again, this is a short-term solution unless we really address some of the issues like ocean acidification, ocean warming, pollution, overfishing. Coral reefs stand to face some of those same declines that we've been seeing. So restoration is an amazing tool nonetheless, but those things should be taken into consideration. So again, what are the actual applications of restoration? Well, the first and most obvious one is recovery. We're seeing some coral populations actually recover from our restoration work. And they also provide a substantial vehicle for research. So here's an image of corals that we deliberately bleached and then outplanted onto the reef to recover. And we saw successful growth, which was really exciting. And that's just one of the examples that we're using coral reef restoration for, to better understand corals and the issues they're facing, as well as the tools available for their long-term sustainability. But perhaps most importantly is that coral reef restoration acts as an incredible platform for citizen science, for everyday individuals to get involved in coral reef conservation and restoration alongside scientists. So I realize that some of you might not be familiar with coral reef restoration or citizen science. So I wanted to provide a general definition of what citizen science is. At its core, it's essentially any research or scientific activity that is conducted by the general public in collaboration with scientists. So our program is obviously has a foundation in coral restoration, but it could be in bird watching or water quality or marine debris. So citizen science has been around for a very long time and is in a lot of different fields. But Dr. Lirman realized that restoration was a really great platform. And so we use our citizen science program to try and bridge the gap between science and society, because sometimes it can feel like research, scientific publications are a little bit too complex for everyday individuals to really comprehend and use. But citizen science is a great way to make it more relatable and accessible. So some of the specific things that you can see as outcomes of citizen science is education. You know, during these expeditions, we're talking with individuals about corals, the issues they're facing, our research. So it raises awareness. It allows people to feel more knowledgeable on these topics. There's also great engagement levels. I mean, these are hands-on experiential opportunities where, as you can see, we're on the reef. We have divers and snorkelers offshore with us, working to actually restore coral populations in their own backyards. So the engagement level is really, really high. But again, most importantly, it can actually transform perceptions and change behaviors so that we can have a more sizable impact. Because again, if we're not doing the necessary action to reduce the impacts of coral decline, it's going to be difficult for coral restoration to really be successful. So by working with the public, we can get societal action and support behind us to put better policies in place, think about our individual actions. So we really love the fact that our research lab also has this citizen science program so that we can just be better at our job with your support and assistance. So what does that specifically mean for our program? Well, we simply combined our coral reef research, restoration with education to make that program we call Rescue a Reef. and again, trying to bridge the gap between science and society. So what does a Rescue Reef citizen science event look like? Well, we call them expeditions. They're half day, and again, available to any individual divers or snorkelers who are interested in getting involved. And so that day will start with a short training session where, again, we'll talk about these tools and techniques to essentially give them an overview of what it takes to restore a reef. Then we're offshore, underwater. We'll have our citizen scientists actually work to maintain some of our coral nursery structures, collect some measurements, and then harvest corals, do some coral gardening. So here you can see one of our citizen scientists actually snipping off pieces of an adult staghorn colony that will be used in restoration. So after we do some work at our underwater coral nursery, we then go to a local reef in need and we plant the corals. So again, here you can see a citizen scientist who had driven a nail into the open reef floor and then actually attached the coral to that nail via a simple cable tie. We've actually kind of changed our methodologies to use cement, which is more efficient. But again, this has been very successful in the past. Finally, we just let the corals grow and monitor, and they do really, really well. And we love this platform because it's the public actually planting these coral seeds that will then grow and produce more habitat over time. So we've been busy. As Dr. Lirman mentioned, we started this program around 2015. So we actually just celebrated our 5-year anniversary, which was an exciting milestone. During that time, we've hosted over 50 of these Rescue Reef expeditions with over 750 people coming offshore with us and meeting our scientists. And those individuals are actually responsible for outplanting over 5,000 corals on local Miami reefs, which is a really, really exciting milestone for us. So we have some assumptions, right? Citizen science obviously has goals, things that we would like to achieve. So the first is that we believe citizen science can change perceptions and foster stewardship for coral conservation. The second is that the citizen scientists can also make a significant contribution to our coral reef research and restoration. And then finally, these actions will build both community and coastal resilience through these expeditions. But we hadn't actually proven this. It was largely assumptions, but we did decide we wanted to conduct a study to actually measure this so that we could call them conclusions rather than assumptions. So we did a study. There was 2 parts, with the first being simply an evaluation of our citizen scientists, so the people that had come on the boat with us and met our team. We surveyed over 100 people and asked them to rate their perceptions both prior to coming on board with us and then after diving with us to assess their knowledge on coral reef status, ecology, and restoration, very similarly to those poll questions you answered at the beginning of this event. So then afterwards, we evaluated them. One of the interesting things is that by coming offshore with us, that did not change their perceptions of coral reef. And so much like all of you, people are generally knowledgeable about the dire state of our coral reefs, which is, I guess, a good and a bad thing. More importantly, by coming offshore with us and learning about these issues, people did improve their knowledge of coral reef ecology and restoration. So there were knowledge gains, or at least perceived knowledge gains, which we were really excited about. And nearly 95% of individuals said that they were likely to participate again. So it's fun. People enjoyed the experience, which was also really important. We wanted it to advance our efforts, but for it to be a fun time. So then we moved on to the actual efficiency or successfulness of our citizen scientists in restoration. So to study this, we hosted a paired study at 3 different reef sites. And at each of those reef sites, we had our citizen scientists outplant 50 staghorn corals. Then our scientists, our trained experts, outplanted 50 right next to those at the same 3 sites, right? So it was a paired study. And then we evaluated the successfulness of those outplants after 30 days or 1 month. So on the right, you can actually see the bar graph showing those 3 different sites. And you'll notice that we saw very similar results. In fact, the mean partial tissue mortality for both scientists and our citizen scientists was below our threshold, which was wonderful news. Both groups were successful. In fact, we found that there was no significant difference between the corals outplanted by our scientists and the citizen scientists. In fact, you might have actually noticed that the citizen scientists did a slightly better job and saw better results than our experts. And I would like believe that that means that those individuals were so careful and concerned with outplanting that they did such a darn good job. So we were thrilled to see that. It meant that the corals outplanted by our citizen scientists do exceptionally well. This is really important because now to date, 25% roughly of all of our coral outplants are by citizen scientists. And so the fact that we can say there's no significant difference between those outplants and those by our trained professionals really allows the field to expand its reach. So if we revisit some of those numbers that I presented earlier, and we look specifically at those 5,000 corals outplanted by citizen scientists, that transformation from the degraded reef that I showed earlier to its current state is really, really special. Those are coral reefs for Miami, built by Miami and its community members. So if I revisit those assumptions that we had made before, we were able to show that they're actual conclusions, that we are changing perceptions, raising awareness, fostering stewardship, while still making significant contributions to our reef restoration program. So for that reason, we're thrilled with all the success Rescue Reef has had these past 5 years. We're really excited for the next. I titled my talk Citizen Science for Social Change because we really feel like the future of coral reefs will be determined by society, right? Science will guide conservation, research, and restoration, and can provide some incredible tools, but we really need public support and participation in order to prevent coral decline any further and allow for their recovery. So with Rescue Reef, we believe that by combining that coral reef research, the reef restoration, and citizen science, we can build a more engaged, resilient community that is then capable of restoring the future of coral reefs alongside of us, right? Because it's really going to be a collective job, and it's going to take a village, and we can't rely solely on solutions. So again, for anyone interested, we're glad you already follow along. We hope to see you on the boat because that's really our grand design. So very briefly, I wanted to thank some of the researchers that were pivotal in that study, as well as our sponsors that have supported Rescue Reef over the years. And an additional thank you to all of our staff, supporters, and citizen scientists who have made it possible. So our next presenter, Juliana Grillo, is our undergraduate Canon Coral Fellow. And she will be talking a little bit about her time with our lab and how we emphasize our science communication efforts. But before we go to her talk, we have one more poll for you to see just how engaged all of you are. So I believe Valeska can share that one. Yes, simply just, do you follow us on social media? Okay, great. Thank you. So at this point, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it over to Juliana.
Thank you, Dalton. Okay, share my presentation. Okay. Hi. So Dalton introduced me already, but I'm the Canon Coral Undergraduate Fellow that's working with Rescue Reef. So I want to share about that. A little bit about myself. I'm from Naples, Florida, and I'm going into my senior year at the University of Miami, majoring in marine affairs and minoring in ecosystem science and policy. And my interests are really in conservation and education and inspiring other people to want to protect our oceans as well. So Canon Rescue Reef teamed up for a Canon Coral Collaboration Project where they're advancing coral conservation by through active reef restoration and online communication with the support of a student fellowship. So the goals of the fellowship were to support Canon Rescue Reef in the restoration activities and outreach, to capture the coral restoration activities, develop multimedia resources, and amplify Rescue Reef's online presence through media campaigns. So a big part of the collaboration with Canon was the establishment and ongoing restoration of the Canon Reef restoration site. So when I first started my fellowship, I got to join Rescue Reef on an expedition to Canon Reef where I got to capture the events with one of the cameras that Canon provided to us. It was a Canon PowerShot G7X Mark II camera. So as Dalton mentioned, kind of the main parts of Rescue Reef are research and restoration, citizen science, and then education and scientific communication. And this is primarily achieved through going on Rescue Reef expeditions. However, it's not always possible for everyone to go on an expedition with us. So social media gives us the power to reach a broader audience on Rescue Reef. So people who may never have had a chance to see a coral for themselves can still learn about Rescue Reef and the important work that's being done. So in order to further our scientific communication activities, another major goal set for the fellowship was to amplify Rescue Reef's online presence. So I did this through structured media campaigns. So for example, we had a Wildlife Wednesday campaign that I worked on through April and May, where the goal was to highlight content that featured our restoration work and the beautiful reefs in South Florida. And so from that, I was able to collect data from our various social media platforms, so on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I found evidence that the strategic communication that I had been working on was effectively increasing Rescue Reef's social media presence. So from the data that I collected, I built out a report that identified the importance of consistent, engaging communication to grow our social media presence and therefore further Rescue Reef's mission. So the evidence supported the idea that putting an effort to maintain an online presence paid off. So when I was putting an effort to post engaging content consistently, we were gaining 4 times as many followers as normal on Twitter, twice as many on Facebook, and 1.5 times as many on Instagram. And so in our case, it allows Rescue Reef to reach a new audience and further our goal of engaging the public on the importance of coral conservation. So throughout my fellowship, I've also been working on developing resources for Rescue Reef, which has allowed me to also develop and improve my skills in various different Adobe programs. So I got to edit photos in Lightroom, like photos that I took at Canon Reef, as well as other photos we share through social media. I also am working on creating graphics through Adobe Spark and Illustrator. So I'm building an infographic that is going to highlight the importance of communication in our Canon Coral collaboration. And I also worked on building out films in Adobe Premiere Pro. So if you check out our Instagram, you can see I built out highlight icons and slides to help our followers learn more about us and our work, and also learn how they can get involved. And so with that, I want to share a film that I produced on the Canon Coral Restoration Project with the footage that I took at Canon Reef.
That concludes our series of presentations. So I hope you all enjoyed. This is now when we are actually going to open it up for question and answers. So I see that we already had a few in the question and answer box. So I will work to actually share some of these with you publicly while reading them off. And then I think I'll probably direct it to specific panelists who may be best to answer them. So I believe the first question is now visible, but I'll read it out anyways. It says, by the time that coral gardening in Florida started, believed to be in 2007, what was the percentage of coral coverage on the reefs? Dr. Lirman, do you want to take a start at that with the 2007 populations?
Sure. Unfortunately, 2007, the years that followed 2007 were actually pretty bad for coral reefs in Florida. We had the 2010 cold snap with record low temperatures that killed a lot of corals. We had the 2014, 2015 bleaching events, and then we had the hurricane. So we're still fighting an uphill battle because we're restoring on the one hand, but then we're losing corals through some natural events that we really can't control. So the latest one being the disease outbreak started in 2014. So it's hard to catch up. So we just need a good 10 years without any major disturbances to get to the point where we have successful sexual reproduction. What I always tell people is our goal is not to keep restoring actively these reefs, but to basically work ourselves out of a job. So once we get to establish these populations and they become reproductive and we've closed these spatial gaps, we've increased the genetic and genotypic diversity of reefs, the hope is that they will recover by themselves through sexual reproduction. One successful sexual reproduction event will dwarf any sort of active restoration that we do over a decade. So we're working towards establishing these reproductive populations so that they can recover themselves. But it is an uphill climb. It really is, a struggle because we have all of these events that we can't control. We lost our 5-year corals and our 7-year corals during Hurricane Irma. We've done a lot to recover those populations, but nevertheless, we took a major hit in 2017, 10 years after we had just started. So, it really is a struggle. And, the fact that we are enhancing our methodology, that we're increasing our reach by working with citizen scientists, that actually lets us, get a leg up on this very difficult task ahead.
So the next question is, does the South Florida Coral Reef Restoration Hub have a website? The answer is it's under construction, but we do have a social media page dedicated to the Restoration Hub. In fact, it's called @Restoration Hub. So if you go on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and look up Restoration Hub or Southeast Florida Coral Reef Restoration Hub, you should find that page that we just launched a little bit ago. So it'll be an awesome resource for keeping up to date on those projects and those milestones. So the next question says, what is the current impact of stony coral tissue loss disease? How are we trying to address that specific stressor? And do we know the origin of this bacteria? Dr. Lirman, again, would you be happy to address?
Sure, I'll answer the last question first. We do not know what the vector or the causal agent is for this disease. As of now, we have a very good team within Florida and elsewhere working on this. So we're just at this point documenting the impacts more than anything else. We were lucky that the branching corals that we focus on, the Acropora species, were spared by this disease. They're not affected by stony coral tissue loss disease, but the massive corals that we're just starting to use for restoration were massively affected. So we're now working with the survivors. We're documenting some environments, finding some corals that escaped the disease, and hopefully we'll be able to recover some of the losses by using these resilient corals. And we're now expanding our toolbox to include microfragmentation of disease-susceptible species within our land-based and our water-based nurseries. So we are now scaling up the outplanting, the propagation and the outplanting of massive corals that are the taxa that were influenced or impacted by the disease. So again, we're just now reacting to the major losses that we've experienced by bringing up our game, by increasing our productivity and our outplanting. And again, this is where citizen scientists can help because we are a fairly small group. We work at capacity, but the only way to expand our reach and our footprint is through the help of the larger population.
Okay, I'm going to answer one more question before we have a surprise at the end for all of you. So the question was, how do the snorkeling citizen scientists participate during the expeditions? Again, we realized that not everyone is a scuba diver, so we worked pretty hard to refine our methodology so that snorkelers could still have hands-on activities. And so what we do is we actually go on scuba to collect pieces of coral, but then on topside, on the boat, we work with the snorkelers to actually build these coral platforms or modules that they can then help free dive and outplant with us, as well as monitor. And it's a really fun activity, and those coral modules, we call them coral cookies, do really phenomenal. And now I'm kicking myself for not including an image because they flourish. So it was another important step we made to make sure that we're working with a diverse group of individuals, because again, we want to work with anyone who's interested or passionate about coral reef conservation. So there's quite a few more questions that I wasn't able to get to here, but we do have a slide coming up in a moment here that has all of our contact information. So we would really, really love for you to reach out and ask them so that we can make sure to address them, because there really are some great ones, but we don't want to keep you too late. So with that, we will switch to presenter mode once again for the surprise. So once we reached our 5-year anniversary, we realized that it may be wise for us to rebrand Rescue Reef. So for those past 5 years, this has been our logo, our emblem. But we wanted it to better encompass everything that we're doing, because we're not only working with staghorn corals now, we're working with multiple different types of corals. And those corals are meant to rebuild reef structure and promote fisheries. And so we wanted a logo that really showed that and how we're actually rescuing a reef and bringing this reef back to life. So I can't see or hear any of you, but I would like a drum roll, please, while we unveil our revamped Rescue Reef logo. Ta-da! So here you can see we kept the staghorn coral in the lower left-hand corner while still keeping our orange color, but we added this aqua blue as well as another type of brain coral and some fish that was more encompassing. And you can see that heartbeat line along the ocean waves that shows how we're trying to bring these reefs back to life, because they really are the keystone ecosystem for our oceans. So before you go, we're going to share one final poll to see what you all think. So on a scale of not a fan to love it, where are we at for the new logo? And feel free to be honest, because it's completely anonymous. Okay, great. A lot of positive feedback. We appreciate your support, your enthusiasm. We're excited about this logo. You are the first to ever see it, so you should feel pretty excited about that. It's always been in-house until this moment. So again, we really appreciate all of you joining us this evening. I believe I have one final slide here. So this is our contact information. You can see our website at the top, our social media handle @Rescue Reef, as well as our email. So you can take a photo here quick or make a mental note, because we would love to have you follow us online in addition to participating in these events and activities. With that, we'll hit you with one final poll to see if you enjoyed the experience and are likely to actually participate in future events. And we appreciate you tuning in tonight. We had a great time, and we look forward to more events down the road to get more of you involved, engaged, and hopefully on board once we're able to host these expeditions again. So thank you all, and good night.